Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our 2 games is 2007's Portal, Valve's experimental physics-based platformer that popularized memes about baked goods, cubes with hearts, and auto-tuned artificial intelligence.
Following that is a magical journey about finding home and looking at how you define that concept, all while paying homage to a legacy RPG franchise's history, 2000's Final Fantasy IX.
A bit difficult to find a theme between Portal and Final Fantasy IX. It's not like FF9 has cake or anything like that, but we decided that these are games that shift their tone pretty drastically from what the franchise is known for. I mean, you think of Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and the kind of the sci-fi mix that they had been known for, and 9 goes back to classical fantasy, whereas, Half-Life is this serious sci-fi franchise, and then Portal kind of throws in this dark humor wrench in it. So that aside, the names of Zidane and Chell are pretty silly names for protagonists.
And also Zidane is a bad character. That has nothing to do with Chell. Chell's fine.
Chell's fine, but also people who ascribe character onto her, I think, are reaching.
A little bit.
There's that. So, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
Boy, howdy. I bought Elden Ring 2 days ago, but then guess what? I haven't had a chance to play it because I've been playing bad versions of Kingdom Hearts. And I'm almost done. I'm almost done with all the Kingdom Hearts I have to play. And then I can start putting together what is looking like is going to be a monster video for Nintendo World Report about why these are a waste of your money. Don't buy them. Don't buy them on Switch. Though, funnily enough, this is the most legwork I've ever done for a video for an NWR. Literally, because I picked up my Switch and I took it to Starbucks yesterday and started Dream Drop Distance. And I'm almost mad at how well it ran. I don't know if it's just because it was the early afternoon and so there was less server congestion, or if Starbucks just has the beefiest Wi-Fi known to man. But weirdly enough, ran great. When I tried to play Kingdom Hearts 2 on Ethernet, ran terribly.
And people have to stay tuned to, or at least check your Twitter feed to see what happened with Kingdom Hearts 3. Oh boy. Likewise, I have not started Elden Ring yet, but though it's more, packing and getting ready for a big move in a few weeks, beginning of April. It should be big and exciting, and we may have to mix in some solo episodes then because you're moving too. So.
Yep, that's going to be a fun little set of weeks.
Yeah, no kidding. But I finished the Halo Infinite campaign, and it was interesting to see how the end of that could be interpreted as an apology from 343, or how the franchise had gone the last couple installments. So there's that. It was interesting. I definitely pushed the limits of my patience through that game on normal, because I'm bad at first-person shooters. But also there's some dumb nonsense that happened with those last couple final bosses. So, hey, it is what it is.
I'm also bad at first-person shooters. Case in point, I also finished Metroid Prime last week, so look forward to the smashed pieces about that.
I definitely will, and hopefully you listening out there should too. Let's talk about some quick composer follow-up headlines. We talk about plenty of composers on this show, and we like to kind of keep tabs on them and their involvement with news in the game industry, and what are they doing? What are they working on? Let's talk about EVO 2022, which is going to run from August 5th through 7th. The big fighting game tournament is going to be in person again, without the inclusion of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. There's a whole thing with PlayStation bought EVO, and Nintendo's doing their own circuit with Panda Global. So and Nintendo just kind of pulled out of that. But the games announced for the Evolution Fighting Game Championships are Street Fighter V Champion Edition, Guilty Gear Strive, Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate, Tekken 7, The King of Fighters 15, Melty Blood Type Lumina, Dragon Ball Fighters, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, and Skullgirls Second Encore. So,
yeah.
Hey, a few games we've talked about on the show in there, but good on Skullgirls.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy with Skullgirls being here, especially because, boy, that game had a rough time of it a couple years ago when, it was brought out that Mike Z, the guy mainly in charge of Skullgirls for a while, was a terrible, terrible human being. But he has been removed from the equation completely, and they didn't get a chance to be at EVO when the game first came out. I'm so excited for Skullgirls to finally have its spot in the center stage for EVO. It's great stuff. Love to see it. Meanwhile, hey, there's actually 2 different stories about releases having to do with games that already came out. The first of which is that Barry Topping, aka Epoch, who we talked about for his work on Paradise Killer, well, he is releasing a Paradise Killer B-Sides album on March 16th. So that's tomorrow at time of release. And it's got a bunch of vocal versions on it, it looks like. Obviously, we haven't heard it by the time we're recording. It hasn't out yet. But he's mentioned vocal versions of different songs. He's mentioned some remixes by guest artists and all that. I love Paradise Killer's soundtrack, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing this.
And that's going to correspond with Paradise Killer's release on PlayStation and Xbox platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be definitely exciting. I didn't see if it feels like it's going to be a candidate for something that comes to Game Pass eventually, but...
Oh, probably. I'm actually kind of surprised it's not coming to Game Pass day one. I'll be real.
Right? Yeah, me too. A state of play happened for PlayStation last week. I say last week because one's happening this week, featuring Hogwarts Legacy, and there's a whole lot to kind of dive in and untangle about that. But last week's was a weird one that opened with the Dino Crisis game that wasn't Dino Crisis and Exo Primal from Capcom.
That game looks so stupid, and I'm so excited to see what it actually turns into.
Earth Defense Force cross Anthem with dinosaurs, bring it on. Okay. But the main thing involving composers that we've talked about on the show before is that Bear McCreary's work on Forspoken will be delayed a little bit. The news came out a couple days before that Forspoken had been delayed to October 11th, and new footage in that state of play confirmed that with the release date at the end. Could be a big year for Bear McCreary with his work on Forspoken and God of War Ragnarok, assuming that game hits this year. But yeah, could be a monster one for Bear there.
Forspoken looks really cool too, like really, really cool. So I'm happy they're delaying it. I would like it to come out and be good, but we will have to see. And I'm very excited also to hear Bear McCreary's work there and in God of War. Who knows? Maybe he'll find a third one. Maybe this will be the first time for a best of where an artist triple dips into the list.
Who knows?
Somebody's got to beat Joel Corlitz eventually. I mentioned there were 2 soundtrack releases that were basically reimaginings of games that had already released. Well, Journey is 10 years old.
Oh my God.
And that, is a hell of an emotional truck to hit. But to celebrate, Austin Wintory and Tina Guo actually went and recorded a full reimagining of the Journey score with the London Philharmonic Orchestra. I was listening to it at work today, actually. It's really good. Some of the ways they rework Road of Trials is really, really good. I think it's my favorite. But Apotheosis, of course, is just... the whole soundtrack is just really good. Oh my God, it's 10 years old now. Whew.
Yeah, that's a special one for sure. I'll have to go check that out. That sounds really interesting. And, we've talked about Nintendo for how they don't seem to understand digital music streaming and all that. One company who has seemed to pick up on that is Square Enix. And Square Enix Music launched their own YouTube channel, presumably to put up videos and tracks and breakouts and all of video game music in like an official company sanctioned way. Ubisoft Music has done this, but it's neat to see Square Enix get on that. So check out the Square Enix Music YouTube channel.
Maybe we'll be able to actually find the music of a Square game for the best of to look at, for real this time.
Yeah.
Because Final Fantasy VII Remake was a mess to find the entire time. And then we had to leave Endwalker off of Best of 2021 because you couldn't find the tracks anywhere. Hopefully this fixes that.
Yeah, they are particularly picky about that. So yes, fingers crossed. Hope that happens. All right, let's talk about our first game this week. And oh boy, we talked about Portal 2 a ways back, but now let's talk about the original Portal.
And funnily enough, I just want to point this out because I realized it earlier. We talked about Portal 2 in the same episode that we talked about Journey.
Yeah, there's some serendipitousness going on there. That was episode 98 that we talked about Portal 2. So Portal was released as part of the Orange Box, which was Valve's game bundle release of Half-Life 2 Episode 2, Team Fortress 2, Portal, and Team Fortress Classic. And that was released on Xbox 360 and PC in North America on October 10th, 2007, Europe on October 18th, 2007, and Australia would get the game a week later on October 25th, 2007. A PS3 version of the Orange Box would launch later in 2007. There would be a Mac release of Portal in 2010, Android in 2014, and the game is coming to Nintendo Switch as part of Portal Companion Collection at some point this year. Portal is developed and published by Valve, and it is a first-person puzzle platform game. Players solve puzzles by shooting and placing portals via a gun, and then teleporting between those puzzles. Neither end of a portal is specifically an entrance or an exit, but all objects that travel through one portal will exit through the other with momentum conserved. And so the classic puzzle that Portal allows to solve is that, if you're on this elevated platform and, you got to cross this long gap, how can you do that? Well, if you can't just, shoot a portal to the other side and then walk through it, through a wall, there's the other possibility of shooting a portal in the floor off of the elevated platform that you're on, and then another portal on the wall on the other side of that gap. And so when you jump into the hole on the floor, the gravity and momentum of your fall carries and propels you as you exit the portal to then give you enough momentum to cross the gap. It's things like that. And just Portal's a really interesting way of thinking about physics and movement in that way. The plot of Portal involves Chell, a silent protagonist, waking up from a stasis bed and hearing instructions and warnings from the artificial intelligence GLaDOS, or the Genetic Life Form and Disk Operating System. And GLaDOS is talking about upcoming tests. Well, Chell enters into distinct chambers that introduce players to the game's mechanics sequentially. So GLaDOS's announcements serve as instructions to Chell and help the player progress through the game, but also develops the atmosphere and characterizes the AI as a person. As the player nears completion, GLaDOS's motives and behavior turn more sinister. Although she's designed to appear encouraging, GLaDOS's actions and speech suggest insincerity and callous disregard for the safety and well-being of the test subjects. Chell is promised cake as her reward if she completes all of the test chambers. Basically, the big questions here: will Chell be able to get through all of the test chambers? And will she get her promised cake? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Portal.
I love Portal. Portal is great. I like Portal 2 a bit more, but Portal was the first game that I ever bought on Steam, ever. And I've probably played it about 15 times. Because it's not long. It's like, what, an hour if you really know what you're doing?
If you really know what you're doing, but probably for first time or if you haven't played in a while, it's probably closer to 2. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's not a very long game though, is the point. I think it is one of the most interesting first person games ever made still. And I really, really, really like Portal. And when we talked about Portal 2 on the show, we both mentioned like, I'm surprised it's not on Switch. And everybody told me we were crazy because Valve doesn't care about consoles, and they're right, but look who's crazy now, baby.
Those Switch numbers don't lie. I like Portal. I don't know if I'd go to say I love Portal, because I think I've only played it twice. I played it, the first time when I had a Steam account kind of around its launch, with Portal, like around 2008, 9-ish, kind of starting to build that PC library there, right? And then played it again several years after that, but it's now been several years now that I think about it since I've played Portal. Fun game, great game. I think a great example of how to teach players your mechanics and, bit by bit and build that up, especially in a first-person perspective. That's not easy to do. It makes me think that I should introduce my fiance to playing games in first person with Portal. So there's something to be said there. It's definitely a really good educational game in that sense. It's used in schools to kind of teach kids, science and momentum and things like that. And like you, I do prefer Portal 2 more. I think Portal 2 does better with leaning into the story and the world and the characters and things like that. And I appreciate that more about Portal 2, but there's something to the simplicity and what Portal started. Like the meme culture and things like that are, when I think of Portal, I think back to stuff like that. Just like, oh, the cake is a lie. Companion cube. Oh yeah, GLaDOS. Isn't GLaDOS funny? And weirdly enough, whenever I think of Portal, I think of, oh boy, Joe, I think you're going to resonate with me on this one. When I say bad gamer webcomics. Because Portal came out at a time where I feel like, with the onset of social media, I mean, Twitter was founded, I think 2006, but it really took off in 2008. And the increase of communication, obviously with, Facebook and YouTube kind of around 2005, 2006, we're at a time of people communicating more and finding community online and gamers realizing that they have culture with one another through things. And then you can say things like the cake is a lie. And at the time they can point to each other and say, I know what that is.
Same hat.
We haven't. Yeah, we said, right. Same hat. It's a shirt. It's a funny shirt. It's, connections like that. Right. But at the same time, then it also gets misused, or at least just used in not the best means. I always think of that one webcomic, and I don't know if it was created in just as a commentary on this sort of thing, but the one that just it ends with the punchline of people awkwardly in silence, and then someone just yells, "The cake is a lie," and it's oh, that's not funny. I don't know. So whenever I think of Portal, that's sadly where my head goes.
I still remember to this day, when I was in high school, this would have been my senior year, I'm pretty sure, my school did a thing where all the creative writers would set up sort of this festival in the courtyard at the school. I don't know. I don't even know if you can call it a courtyard because it's not like it was enclosed or anything. And they could write quotes and stuff that they came up with and put them on the walls as decorations. And one person thought it was very clever to put the cake is a lie. And even back then in 2011, my skeleton tried to escape my body because even by that point, it was just such Like, meme culture did nothing nice to this game's writing. Nothing. Nerds ruined it completely. I still love playing Portal, but when I replayed it a couple years ago, both of them, it was just like, oh, a lot of these lines aren't funny anymore because I heard them repeated ad nauseum for years, and that's unfortunate, but what can you do?
So yeah, I totally agree with you there, and I just feel like it hit a time where it was an easy game for a lot of people to point to others and say, we have this in common, and let's be friends based off of this. And let's say the funny parts from the stand-up bit over and over again. You're right. So that's what I think of Portal. Great game. Wow. It's fantastic game, but man, was spiraled out of context and is a little rough in some places to look back on. So the development of Portal involves a team of students at the DigiPen Institute of Technology. And they released an indie game in 2005. It was a freeware game called Narbacular Drop. Narbacular Drop was essentially Portal before Portal. And so Valve was at this DigiPen showcase. They saw this game, and Valve hired the entire original team behind Narbacular Drop. From there, they let them kind of develop and flesh out the idea into a possible game for Valve, and it took about 2 years and 4 months to complete this game. Also, no more than 10 people were involved with the development of the game. Now, for the first year of development on Portal, the team focused mostly on the gameplay, not worrying about any narrative structure. But then you'd get, kind of demos and betas passed off to playtesters, and they found the game to be fun, but asked what was the point of it? What was this all leading towards? What was the point of these test chambers? And so, all right, we got to work in a story. And so then the Portal team worked with the Half-Life series writer, Mark Laidlaw, to fit the Portal game into the overall overarching plot of the Half-Life series. The team also kind of sat amongst themselves, especially now that we're getting a narrative going and there's got to be a point to doing all of these tests. And so they kind of asked themselves, what's the motivating factor here? What's the philosophical point to doing all of this? And they said that there was about silence for about 15 minutes, just an awkward silence, people trying to think and figure it out, until someone just spoke up and said, well, a lot of people like cake. And so it was from there. Having cake be the motivating factor, having GLaDOS point this out to Chell. And then when you start to kind of go behind the scenes at the Aperture Science Center, you discover that things aren't exactly what they seem. According to the project lead, Kim Swift, the aforementioned cake in Portal, is a Black Forest cake that she thought looked the best at the nearby Regent Bakery and Cafe in Redmond, Washington. And as an Easter egg within the game, its recipe is scattered among various screens showing lines of binary code. So the Regent Bakery has apparently said that since the release of the game, its Black Forest cake has been one of its most popular items.
Which is, what? Good for them.
Yes, taking a popular thing and really running with it. I was curious because, you heard the name Kim Swift before as kind of like the lead driving force behind Narbacular Drop and Portal. And I'm like, I know she did games like Quantum Conundrum, trying to capitalize on the puzzle platformer aspect of games. But where is she now? Well, apparently she worked at EA on Star Wars Battlefront 2. And from there, she worked for Google for Stadia and worked at one of their internal development houses on one of their teams, kind of working on Google's cloud streaming and gaming technology. But Stadia has not really fulfilled its promise or its vision, and it's kind of in the death throes right now as we speak. So yeah, when that internal dev team over at Google Stadia shuttered and Kim Swift had to find new work, she found a similar position over at Microsoft. She is the Senior Director of Cloud Gaming at Xbox Game Studios, basically trying to take what Google was trying to do with that technology and applying it over at Xbox.
If you want like some good insight into exactly like where she went, she also talks about Portal a lot. There's the podcast Humans Who Make Games, hosted by Adam Conover, who does Adam Ruins Everything and used to do stuff with College Humor and all that. He actually did an episode where he talked to Kim Swift, and it's a really, really, really good episode. She talks about Gabe Newell's knife collection that was very prominently displayed as they were discussing being given jobs at Valve, and just a bunch of stuff. She also worked at Twitch for a little while, I believe. She also worked at EA for Origin. It's a really interesting episode, and I definitely recommend people check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought that was really neat because there wasn't like too much out there as far as development history, some neat little tidbits like that. But like, what is Kim Swift doing these days? So yeah, I forgot about that podcast. Got to check that one out. Portal reviewed very well with a Metacritic average of 90. It was praised for its originality, its unique gameplay, and its dark story with humorous lines of dialogue. Criticized overall for its short duration and its limited story. Though I think if you look back on it, it's like a prime example of making the most with not that much time. And so I think there's nothing wrong with it being as long as it is.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Portal 2 gets away with being a little bit longer simply because it adds more mechanics. Whereas in Portal 1, it's literally just you're handed the portal gun, energy balls, and cubes. I have now described everything in Portal 1.
Yeah, you can't go and expand on too much. And if anything, I think people say that Portal 2 gets a little long in the tooth.
Yeah, I think I agree with that overall.
Excluding Steam download sales, over 4 million copies of the game have been sold since its release. Some people estimate those Steam sales, though, at over 8 million copies. So it's a popular game for sure. Had its time also when it was being made available for free. When it goes on sale during the big Steam sale sessions, I suppose, super cheap. You can get this game for incredibly cheap if you don't have this in your Steam library already, to be honest, because many people do. It was nominated for Best Game of the Decade at the Spike Video Game Awards. It wasn't really considered for too much at the VGAs or VGX or whatever iteration it was called over there at Spike, because the orange box as a whole was really the main consideration for that year in 2007. So there wasn't really anything Portal specific, but it was nominated for 3 awards at the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Awards. Those are the DICE Awards that we now know them, and it won all 3. Outstanding Character Performance for Ellen McLean as GLaDOS. There's Outstanding Achievement in Gameplay Engineering and Outstanding Achievement in Game Design. It won the Game of the Year Award, along with the Innovation Award and Best Game Design Award at the Game Developers Choice Awards. And it also won Game of the Year from several online publications. Looking back at it, different outlets have rated Portal very highly. Games Radar named it the best game of all time in 2013. It's a lofty title for it. Wired, on the other hand, considered Portal to be one of the most influential games of the first decade of the 21st century.
In terms of writing, yeah.
Yeah. To be the prime example of quality over quantity for video games. Portal's legacy, I mean, we've kind of talked about it, but really, the memes, the merch, you know someone who has a stuffed companion cube somewhere. Even if they're hiding it from you, you do. Their shame
will one day be shown to the world.
Mm-hmm. There was a standalone version that was included with extra puzzles called Portal Still Alive, and that was published by Microsoft Game Studios, and that was made on the Xbox Live Arcade service in October 2008, exclusively for Xbox 360. Of course, a sequel, Portal 2, released for Xbox 360, PS3, and PC in 2011. And, that Steam Deck had its first wave of handheld PC devices roll out recently. And one of the big kind of flagship, here's how you make the system sort of work optimally, kind of like a free bundle game there. Aperture Desk Job was a Steam Deck release this year here in 2022.
I have heard you can actually play it off of a Steam Deck, but I haven't given it a shot yet because I can't afford a Steam Deck.
Yeah,
not right now.
Yeah, not while house is being moved.
Yeah, that ain't happening. Maybe one day I would love to own one, but some things are gonna have to change majorly before that can happen.
Sponsorship deals, eh?
Yeah, hey Valve, Gabe, if you wanna, we'll advertise the Steam Deck. But I've heard that the ad reads work better if you're holding the product in your hand. Yeah, one of these days I'll get it. But I've heard Aperture Desk Job is pretty all right. And I'm always happy to get more material out of the Portal universe. So,
yeah, Portal 3 is just one of those things where it's like, it's probably never going to happen, but people talk about it because they love them some Portal.
Mm-hmm.
The composer that we're going to talk about this week, his name is Kelly Bailey. Couldn't find any information on when Kelly Bailey says he was born, but he is formerly a product unit manager at Microsoft. He has a programming background that includes consumer multimedia, database engines, and networking. That was kind of how his skill set was pitched on like a Valve website. He is primarily known for doing all of the music and sound effects for Half-Life, and he wrote sound code to create character speech and DSP reverb effects. Kelly Bailey, notably, is one of the 4 Valve employees who served as facial models for Gordon Freeman's face in Half-Life's promotional materials. He was with Valve from 1998 until 2011, when he left with Mike Dussault to concentrate on their project Sunspark Labs LLC. Basically, they wanted to develop iOS games. Now, the other Valve composer of note, Mike Moraski, who we covered in that episode 98 when we talked about Portal 2, he mentioned in February 2014 that Bailey had returned to Valve. But in a February 2016 article on Forbes, it was reported that Bailey had founded his own company, Indimo Labs, and that he was no longer with Valve. Also notably, Kelly Bailey is also the lead singer for a Seattle band, Lucy's Fishing Trip, and, as he said, therefore, shaves less than the rest of the Valve staff. Kelly Bailey's discography includes Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Half-Life 2 Episode 1, Half-Life 2 Episode 2, basically all of the Half-Life games. He was also consulted on making sure that Half-Life Alyx's soundtrack went into kind of the same general direction. So it's a neat connection there. Of course, he composed on Portal. He also composed additional music for a downloadable content pack for Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And then he ended up working, I think, at Indimo on HTC Vive games, where he was the sole developer on a game called Vanishing Realms: Rite of Steel. And so he was the composer for that game as well. Got a couple little tidbits on a couple Portal tracks here that we'll mix in the Critical 5. But also notable that this soundtrack was released with an Orange Box soundtrack collector's edition. And it was also included on a disc for the Portal 2 soundtrack. It was like a whole separate thing that was like, oh, this is also the Portal soundtrack, by the way. So this soundtrack has been put out there. It actually has titles. That actually helps. So when we get to the 5 critical tracks to talk about the music from Portal, we start with this track here. Critical track number 1, Procedural Jiggle Bone. All right, so I primarily put this track here, one, because of its prominent place in the game. It plays on the main menu in Portal, and also during test chambers 8 and 19. So it's kind of a main establishing song for the Portal soundtrack, and kind of what you're going to get used to of this like dark ambience. And this one is just like this wobbly, otherworldly piece that's kind of upsetting to listen to if you just kind of focus on it a lot. But I think it does a really good job of like setting the uneasy environment that like not everything is right here. Aperture Science may look like this nice, clean center, but there's something else going on here. Not only that, though, with the main menu music, that's a fantastic title, Procedural Jiggle Bone. I don't think there are too many tracks that we've covered on the show that have better titles than that.
Yeah, I don't think we've talked about any that have the word jiggle in them. And to be honest, I feel like every game should have one track with the word jiggle in them. That's the law now.
That's our challenge that we put out to other composers.
All right, Elden Ring, give me the jiggle song.
You know, I'm sure there's a boss there that has something jiggle. It could work. It could work.
Oh, there's probably some slime thing somewhere in there. I don't know.
Yuka Kitamura, where are you at? Is Elden Ring getting DLC? I don't know. Figure it out.
I have always interpreted this as being like the sound of really, really high-tech, hard-to-understand technology. Maybe even just the hum of like the portal gun or something like that in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It really, really builds up the atmosphere of the Aperture Science test chambers really, really well. And it does sound off-putting in a lot of ways. It's it's good.
And it's composed by Kelly Bailey. So this is him kind of carrying over his work from Half-Life into a sort of thematically consistent game here. And just, dark ambience here is strong. It kind of continues in a different, more playful way with the next track here on the 5 critical tracks for Portal. This is Subject Name Here. This track also composed by Kelly Bailey. This one's kind of a bouncing, pulsing, happy track, I think. It's filled with all of these little high-pitched beeps, but it kind of starts with this like bass synth, doop, 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 doop. And it plays an important part in the game here. There's another track that plays when you get the portal gun for the first time and you can only shoot one portal. But this plays when you acquire the dual portal device. And that allows you to shoot both the blue and the orange portals. And this happens in Test Chamber 11. This is a piece listening to it that like I remember hearing this play. And it's like, oh yeah, this is definitely Portal. Definitely associated with Portal. And I had forgotten that it was at such a key moment. But you know what? That makes sense. It's like kind of like the world opening up to you. You can do many more things now. Like the possibilities are endless.
I was trying to figure out why it sounded so familiar, but this is the moment it hands you the ability to play Portal. And I forget every time I replay that, like, oh, right, you start out with, like, only being able to shoot one.
Yeah.
Which is probably good. That's a really good way to make sure that you're not completely overwhelmed. And, there's something about this song that's just like, yeah, I can finally do it. I can finally be the Portal person. It feels sort of celebratory a little bit, but also still that feeling almost like it has this background of just humming electronics and stuff like that. It's neat.
Mm-hmm, yeah, it's freeing and positive, but that just means you're now more able to expose the rot underneath everything. Number 3 on their Critical 5. This is another famous piece from this game. This is You Can't Escape, You Know. So as GLaDOS was built up more and more throughout the game, and people noticed and definitely remember GLaDOS being a prominent villain that year in 2007, you have to have a final battle with GLaDOS in your attempt to escape Aperture Science Center. And apparently the GLaDOS battle was like reworked in a whole bunch of different ways. But eventually, ultimately, deciding that like, let's keep things pretty simple, but give the player the time constraint. And at that point, the player will think it's more complicated than it actually is because there's the pressure of time. And this music helps with that intensity, that pressure. Do not mind the deadly neurotoxin that is flowing into the central AI chamber. Mostly harmless, right? But yeah, this piece is composed by Mike Moraski, and I think it's just really cool. A memorable boss battle, and then the music to go alongside it. This kind of thumping bass piece. We covered Mike Moraski's work in Portal 2, and so it makes sense that like, oh, this sounds more like a Portal 2 track. Oh no, it's just kind of the continuation of like that thematically into the next game. But just some really interesting sound effects at play here to go along with like the thumping bass line that really gets you amped for this boss fight and this encounter with this AI.
Yeah, and it's no bombs to throw at you.
No.
Let's be real. It's not bombs for throwing at you, but like it does a great job of like matching the very hectic tone of the GLaDOS fight, because this song, I believe, specifically plays pretty much right when you destroy her morality core.
Mm-hmm.
And she mask off where she's like, oh yeah, cool, I'm gonna kill you now. It's great. And I think this song is probably like much like a lot of the soundtrack of this game. There's not a lot to it, but it brings across that tone very, very well. And all I can hear when I listen to this song is just all of her really mean remarks, because this is the point where she's in Portal 2, she starts mean. In Portal, she doesn't get mean until the end, and it really makes it sort of impactful when that happens. And all I can hear is just her saying really mean things when I listen to this song.
There's one boss encounter with big stakes. I mean, you'll come across energy balls and things that'll kill you in one shot, and that's fine throughout the course of your test. But there's one boss fight in this game, and it's this. So it's a memorable moment. It's a memorable track. But then you got to get out. You got to escape Aperture. And that's where this track comes in, number 4 on the Critical 5. This is You're Not a Good Person. This piece is also composed by Mike Moraski. And no, the title of You're Not a Good Person is not referring to Clayton Echard on this season of The Bachelor in the United States, but it actually involves the turret ambush toward the end of Chell's escape from Aperture at the end. Just an intense percussive track here that the chaos of all these turrets firing upon you as you're dashing through. Apparently there was going to be part of the confrontation where like GLaDOS was going to be following you out, and it just would have added to like a crazier escape, but had to scale it back, keep it simple. There was also going to be like a third part of the game besides like the clear halves that the game is broken up into. But again, timing, scale, like, kind of rein it in. But yeah, this piece is interesting, I think, because it kind of starts right from the beginning of the piece here in this clip. And then you hear it kind of like fade out a little bit, like the drums and percussions kind of like fading into the back, kind of making me think of like how Chell is escaping and leaving that behind her. It's not all, sunshine and roses and happiness on the other side, but you're at least leaving that behind. So I feel like that's mirrored in an interesting way.
This is by far my favorite instrumental song on the soundtrack. Obviously, my favorite is obvious. We all know what it is. But that's another thing I constantly forget every time I go replay Portal is that big turret ambush where it's just this giant room with a bunch of turrets in these little alcoves aiming for you, and it's really tense, and it feels really satisfying to like get every single one like one by one. And this song is part of why it feels so intense and so good, I guess. I might not be a good person, but this is a good song. Thank you. Tip your waitresses.
It sure is a good song. But you're right. To wrap up the Critical 5, if there was one track that was going to be here, if we only had to bring up one track, it would be this track here from Portal. To wrap up the Critical 5, this is, of course, Still Alive.
Maybe Black Mesa. That was a joke. Haha, that chance. Anyway, this cake is great. It's so delicious and moist. Look at me still talking when there's science to do. When I look up there, it makes me glad I'm not you. I've experiments to run. There is research to be done on the people who are still alive. Then believe me, I am still.
Because what else amplifies the meme culture of Portal but a song? Specifically, a song composed by Jonathan Colton, and it is the well-acclaimed end credits theme of Portal, written by Colton and sung by Ellen McLean, reprising her role as GLaDOS. Of course, Ellen McLean, a prominent, talented opera singer, which she highlights more in Portal 2. But for this one, to have GLaDOS be singing and have, funny lyrics to go behind it. Like, apparently Colton met with the Portal staff like a year before the game shipped. And, after meeting with them with writer Eric Wolpaw and, creative lead Kim Swift, they're like, he's got to write something for GLaDOS. Like, that's got to be how the game ends, with the credits. And of course, Still Alive became very popular. Everyone loves it, right? I think Want You Gone I like more. I think we were kind of in agreement with that, if I remember correctly, in Portal 2.
Mm-hmm. Want You Gone is a better song, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, this is a good way to end the game. I feel like it's fitting. And I thought it was so interesting to learn that the use of a song in general over the closing credits was based on a similar concept from the game God Hand, which is one of writer Eric Wolpaw's favorite games.
I would not have bet on that name being said during this segment. Okay.
I love that. I almost want to bring God Hand to the show eventually just so we can talk about that song. It's one of those. Like, I feel like the Portal soundtrack overall doesn't do much to stand out. There are a couple tracks like Subject Name Here and like You Can't Escape, that it's like, oh yeah, those are tracks. But like it's the same thing with like, oh, you talk about Portal because you want to talk about Still Alive. You talk about God Hand because you want to talk about God Hand. And so I think that's really interesting that parallel crosses over there.
I mean, I can see that as why, yes, we should cover God Hand at some point. I don't know what song you're referring to. I've never heard the soundtrack to God Hand, ever. I just know of it.
Oh my. Gonna kick your ass into the Milky Way. All right.
Oh, hell yeah. Now I'm looking forward to God Hand coming up at some point. I think this is also the song that I think Jonathan Colton had a pretty big following before this point, because if I remember correctly, his Song a Week series had already concluded, where he spent like, I think a year, maybe 2, writing a new song every week. And this also seems to have built a friendship between Valve and Colton, not only because he came back to do Want You Gone for Portal 2, but he also, his song Ari Your Brains can be found on a jukebox in Left 4 Dead, which is just great. So it's also really interesting to see that, like, that's how I found out about Jonathan Coulton. I didn't know any of his stuff until I played Portal. I don't know about you.
No, I feel like that was the first time I heard his name too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like this specific song, just in general, is what turned a lot of people his way. And that's good, because Jonathan Coulton is a very, very talented songwriter, and a lot of his songs are just as, if not more funny than Still Alive.
Absolutely. But yeah, had to have it here to wrap things up. Got a couple tracks on the cutting room floor, though, and it's a pretty short soundtrack, so I only have two, and honestly, it's kind of fleshing out most of the rest of the soundtrack, to be honest. This first piece here is 4,000 Degrees Kelvin. This piece is composed by Kelly Bailey, and this is a track that plays as GLaDOS attempts to incinerate the player by lowering them into the fire pit on the unstationary scaffold at the end of Test Chamber 19. Another piece that you kind of hear, like that synth, the vocals come in, it's like, oh, this is Portal. Like, this is kind of like the darker side of Portal. I feel like, again, setting up the groundwork for bigger musical ideas that are expanded on later by Mike Moraski in Portal 2. But yeah, just this dramatic, chaotic piece as like big things are happening as GLaDOS tries to do some evil things.
Yeah, just like the instant tone change of, oh no, she's actively trying to kill me.
This is the part where she kills me.
This is, they did it first. God, that gagging too is so good.
Oh, yes.
I think this is among my favorites. I think I still like You're Not a Good Person more, but it's one of those like really hectic moments that I think the song goes away pretty quick after you escape, almost right away, but I don't know for sure. It's good, and also feels a little bit closer to some of the stuff we would have heard in 2.
Yeah.
Like this one has a very good point A to point B there, I think.
Absolutely. We wrap up the cutting room floor with Stop What You Are Doing. In a piece that reminds me greatly of the Zero Escape series. Sidebar, I really want to bring Virtue's Last Reward to the show, but literally it's always been only Shinji Hosoe, and we've already talked about him for his work on 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, and I don't know what to do. But yeah, this piece makes me think of that series for sure. Stop What You Are Doing is composed by Mike Moraski, and it's just this creepy ambient piece that plays during Chell's escape as she traverses through the dilapidated maintenance areas and offices of the enrichment center. And so this is where you're kind of starting to see the underbelly and the rot at Aperture. And it's an important establishing piece for like the back half of the game, and just kind of shows that what's really there under everything at Aperture.
Yeah, it's got this really creepy atmosphere to it that perfectly matches, like, you're getting to see behind the glass that you've assumed the whole game, that like scientists are watching you take these tests, and it's empty. There's no one there. Nobody is here. And from the looks of it, nobody's been here for a really long time. And it's just this moment of like, oh, okay. So, literally all of this has been a lie. And it turns out, empty offices that should have people in them are really creepy just on their own. And this song works with that fact really well.
Absolutely. What will I never forget about Portal? Besides bad gamer webcomics and meme culture that goes along with it, I learned that apparently based on other media or like some text that's kind of hidden in Portal 2 or other games, Aperture is supposedly based in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So that hits generally close to home. I'm in southeast of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan, but still some Michigan pride there for Aperture.
I don't know if you should have pride for Aperture being where you are.
You know, not many things are in Michigan, although it cracks me up also seeing, we talked about Elden Ring a few times already, weirdly, but there's the bit where like someone probably edited like a Wikipedia article or something like that. Like, where's Elden Ring based in? Ohio. And I love it. Love it.
There's an Elden Ring meme of somebody teleporting somewhere with a bunch of tornadoes, and the caption on the picture is like, I teleported to Kansas, so I understand.
Yes, absolutely. But no, I think it's Portal's a great game, just kind of establishing something new, taking a neat idea and just kind of building on it, not going into it too much, just giving us enough to explore the concept, leave us wanting more, and then delivering an amazing sequel several years later. I think, we've talked about it a few times already, but Portal 2 just delivered in every way. What a fantastic sequel.
Yeah. I'm glad they're coming as a package deal on Switch.
Yes.
Like, if they were separate, but also, I hate to say this, I really do. If that game costs more than $20, that's unacceptable. You can get both of those games for like $5 regularly.
And you don't need the most powerful PC to run it. Like, let's be honest. Like,
yeah.
Think of where you want your money to go if that's the case.
Yeah, I hope it is priced appropriately, but also I'm very excited to have mobile Portal, which is really weird to think about the fact that they're releasing it on Switch while also releasing the Steam Deck. And I think that's a sign that they are fully aware that the Steam Deck and the Switch are not the same audience.
Yeah, 100%. So, to transition to our next game, we like to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, wherever. Had to do a cover of Still Alive, right? There was one that popped up from Nathan Sharp. And Nathan Sharp is known as Nate Wants to Battle. But on the YouTube channel Give Heart Records is Nate Wants to Battle's cover of Still Alive, giving it a more pop punk vocal taste. It's a neat take on it. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll be right back.
But there's no sense crying over every mistake. You just keep on trying till you run out of cake. And the science gets good, and you make a neat gun for the people who are still alive. I'm not even angry. I'm being so sincere right now.
All right, everybody, let's ditch the high-tech world of Aperture Science and Portal and GLaDOS, and let's jump into the realm of fantasy with Final Fantasy IX. This game released for the PlayStation on July 7th, 2000 in Japan, which is my sister's birthday. Not 2000, but like July 7th specifically. That's weird. She has the same birthday as Zidane. November 13th, 2000 in North America, and February 16th, 2001 in Europe. It has an iOS and PC release that came out in 2016, hit PS4 in 2017, and then landed on the Switch and Xbox One in 2019. It was developed and published by Squaresoft. Of course, nowadays it is published by Square Enix, as this game predated the Square and Enix merger. As expected from one of the most prolific RPG series pretty much ever made, we have covered main Final Fantasy a lot on this show. First time was Final Fantasy VI in episode 23, Final Fantasy X in episode 46, then 7 in 63, 14 in episode 72, along with the Heavensward expansion recently in episode 150, and Final Fantasy 15 in episode 118. We've also talked about spin-offs like Tactics and Crystal Chronicles, and this will not be the last time you hear us talk about Final Fantasy even. It's a big franchise with some damn good music. So what is Final Fantasy? Well, again, we've talked about it a lot, but for the most part, only 2 of the games on that list actually play like FF9, being 6 and 7. See, Final Fantasy IX is an RPG where battles take place using the ATB system. That stands for Active Time Battles, which, much like 6 and 7, like I said, and all the ones before that as well, 8 I think also uses ATB. I don't know, I haven't started 8 yet. Basically, how it works is every character has a bar that fills gradually over time during battle, and when it fills all the way, that character then gets to act. You get to pick something that character does and rinse and repeat. You can have buffs and debuffs to slow down the enemy or speed yourselves up and stuff like that. So it's kind of, up to this point, was Final Fantasy's bread and butter. I'm pretty sure this is the last one in the series to use ATB, because 10 doesn't. I know that for sure. The other really sort of unique thing about FF9 is how abilities work. So kind of like FF7's materia, in Final Fantasy VII, materia was basically something that you could equip to your character, and that would give them the ability to use an ability, such as a spell or something. 9 does something very similar, but a little different, where all abilities and spells and stuff like that are connected to equipable weapons and armor, and only certain characters can learn certain abilities, etc., etc. And the way that it works is, while they're wearing that armor or using that weapon, they have access to that ability, and every battle ends by rewarding you AP for that piece of equipment. And once that equipment has been leveled up all the way, then the character will have permanent access to that ability, even if they unequip the armor or the weapon. It's, from what I can tell, a very divisive manner of doing it, especially since it kind of goes away from materia in that anybody can carry any materia in Final Fantasy VII. You can make Yuffie a healer if you want. You shouldn't, but you could. But that's not the case in 9, where there can be an item that teaches, like, Gravira or something like that. And only Vivi, maybe Garnet, can learn that. And if you put it on anybody else, that's grayed out, etc. It's weird, and I don't even know how I feel about it. Another unique feature to Final Fantasy IX is a little bit less divisive. It is trance mode. So it's kind of like FF7's Limit Breaks, where after you take a certain amount of damage, characters can enter a powered up form that lasts for a short amount of time. It changes their abilities to be stronger. The example I saw was that Vivi, the black mage of the party, gets the ability to double cast during trance, which means he can use 2 spells in one turn. It's not a good system, because I believe the bar does not stay constant between fights, unlike the limit break in FF7. And a lot of people I saw talked about how it would launch right after they had landed the final blow. So, like, the enemy's already dead, but hey, trance, you did it. It's not great. Very forgettable part of the game. Otherwise, though, it's your usual JRPG fare. You're running around on overworlds, entering towns, random encounters, riding chocobo, etc., etc., etc. There's not much more to it. So, the story of FF9, it is a day of celebration in the kingdom of Alexandria, as the Tantalus troop has flown into town on their airship and are preparing to put on a delightful show for the masses, which will include the kingdom's Queen Braun. A young boy named Vivi, unable to acquire a ticket to the show, finds his own way to sneak into the audience. Meanwhile, It turns out Tantalus is not just in Alexandria to put on a show, but they've actually been hired to kidnap the princess of Alexandria, Garnet, and take her to the neighboring kingdom of Lindblum, a job given to one of the main players of Tantalus, a young human with a tail named Zidane. This turns out to be a lot easier than they thought it would be, as they actively encounter Garnet as she's trying to sneak aboard their ship and stow away to go to Lindblum. As the ship begins to make its escape, they accidentally get Vivi involved. I don't 100% remember how Vivi gets involved in this, but it's very much a wrong place, wrong time sort of thing. He gets whisked away into the airship, while Alexandria's captain of the guard, a loyal stick-in-the-mud knight named Steiner, is also wrapped up in his attempts to save Garnet and ends up on the ship as well. Garnet wishes to go to Lindblum to warn the king of her mother's recent erratic warmongering behavior, and it becomes the responsibility of Zidane and Vivi to get her there, while Steiner spends all of his time formulating ways to get Garnet back to Alexandria. But unfortunately for him, he's a super huge idiot, and none of his plans work. So, what is the source of Queen Braun's change in behavior? How is the mysterious arms dealer Kuja involved? Why does Vivi look so similar to the mass-produced Black Mage army Braun has been creating? And can Garnet save both the world and her mother from the evils of war and corruption? Peter, this is where I will ask, what are our experiences with Final Fantasy IX?
I've only seen some of it be played, and I feel like it's a pretty notable game in the series, not only kind of going back to its roots as far as what people think of Final Fantasy, but also its soundtrack. It's a soundtrack with a lot of notable pieces. I wouldn't say it's up there with 7s or 6s in Final Fantasy lore, but like it's maybe, oh no, there's also 10. It's like 3rd or 4th place that are kind of up there as like among the better Final Fantasy soundtracks, to the point where even though I haven't played it and I've maybe only seen like an hour or two of it, like I'm generally familiar with the characters and I'm able to recognize some tracks to the point where hey, I'm bringing a couple to the cutting room floor, which is rare for a game that I haven't played. So yeah, some limited experience there, but I had forgotten that Garnet and Braun were related, and wow, that's hard to piece together visually.
Yeah. Braun's design sure is
comical.
I played this game for the first time a couple years ago, back in 2020. I enjoyed it. 7 and 10 are better games.
Although some people say that 9 is the best.
It is often like held up in regard for the best Final Fantasy game. It's usually between 6, 7, and 9 is what I see the most. 10 sometimes also sneaks in there, though 14 recently, in the past few years, has been vying for that spot pretty hard. I think the only thing holding 14 back is the fact that it is an MMO, though apparently they're going to rework a bunch of stuff so that you can essentially just play it as a single-player game. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that works out.
Yeah, sign me up for that.
It's good. We're going to learn that thinking it's not the best, both in terms of soundtrack and game, is actually, I guess, wrong, because this is two notable Final Fantasy figures' favorite game in the series. But we'll get to that in a bit. It's a fine game. The cast leaves a lot to be desired. Zidane and Garnet are very boring. Vivi is great. The Dragoon character Freya is great. Steiner gets better as the story goes on and he stops being such a war crime apologist. And, you know, I had to remind myself what Amaranth's name was, because he might as well not be in this game. So, yeah, it's a fine game. I love its soundtrack, though, so I'm very, very happy to be able to bring it to the show. I've been waiting to do this for years. Let's jump into how this game came to be first, though. It was developed at the same time as Final Fantasy VIII. I believe we talked about that a little bit during the FF10 episode, where FF10 was also sort of in development alongside both 8 and 9 for at least some length of time. And apparently during development, it was not 100% certain that it was going to officially be Final Fantasy IX. They did not know if this was actually going to be the next game of the series, because they were really worried that moving away from the sort of more modern sci-fi fantasy style of 7 and 8 would maybe alienate audiences, because those games were both crazy popular. And bringing it back to a more fantasy setting, they were kind of just worried about there being some blowback on that. But at the same time, they really wanted to make a game that was more in line with the older games. Series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi actually wanted FF9 to serve as sort of a farewell to a whole era of Final Fantasy, because this would be the last game on the PS1. It would be the last RPG of its style in the series, because after this, it goes full 3D with Final Fantasy X. And so it was meant to be sort of an homage and a look back with a tender smile, which is kind of sad, honestly, because this is the last game that Sakaguchi would write for Final Fantasy. Because shortly after all this came out, they also did this little thing called Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. And Sakaguchi wrote that, and they kind of threw him under the bus afterwards, at which point he was pretty much jettisoned from the company. He's also said that this is his favorite game in the franchise, which actually makes that one ProZD video a lot funnier.
Yeah.
Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I like 9, of course.
As he hands him like a wad of cash. You didn't even need to pay him. He's already said he likes 9 the best in interviews. So Final Fantasy IX was mainly developed in Hawaii because there were a lot of American devs part of the team. And this was sort of a compromise because they didn't want to all move out to Japan. So screw it. We'll move into an island literally in the middle of the ocean between Japan and the US. I don't know how that was a compromise in terms of the Japanese devs. I don't know if they went to Hawaii, but who knows?
That's wild. I mean, I can't think of a game that we've ever heard that about.
Yeah, hey, if somebody wants me to do a project and I have to move to Hawaii, I think I could probably stomach that. It's never cold there. So Final Fantasy VIII had made very heavy use of motion capture to animate characters. I would say that FF7 probably did too, in its few pre-rendered cutscenes where everybody has regular proportions instead of Popeye. But FF8 drops the Popeye models. They're all regularly proportioned humans. So, hey, motion capture. But that wouldn't work for 9 because, along with a move back to more fantasy settings, the characters in 9 are way more cartoony than 8. They have very exaggerated proportions, and they're all sort of stubby. And it's a lot different of a sort of animation style, so they couldn't use motion capture, which I'm sure was a hell of a jump for a lot of them after having not done it for a while. Director Hiroyuki Ito, though, I don't know why I felt the need to say this, but I need people to know. He's apparently who decided Zidane should be a womanizer, because Zidane is a womanizer.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently that was Ito's idea. The ending of Final Fantasy IX was apparently changed 7 times late in development. I could not find the actual cited source on that because it's one of those where like it's lost to time. It was I don't remember what website it was, but it's gone. But yeah, 7 times. And as the game had been planned for release earlier in 2000, it actually got pushed back specifically to avoid releasing too close to Enix's Dragon Quest VII. Which is weird, because when I saw that, I went and looked up when did Dragon Quest VII come out. And it came out in August, which is after Final Fantasy IX. And it turns out apparently Dragon Quest VII got delayed like 5 times before it actually ended up coming out. So FF9 beat it to store shelves, but it was still very close. One of my favorite things I discovered about this game is that Zidane, Garnet, and Vivi are actually in a Coke commercial. Like a full CG Coke commercial of them like chasing this Coke bottle cap around Alexandria. It's really weird to look at, and it sure is a commercial.
Wow, that's special.
Yeah, it's man, early 2000s CGI sure existed. It's so weird.
The comment on YouTube that says, "Wow, this looks like a really fun, lighthearted game. I can't wait to enjoy a Coke with my good friend Vivi."
Oh no, Vivi, why are we having conversations about the concept of death? No, this isn't what I came here for, my Coke.
And then Pepsi Man is the final boss.
Another thing I did not know about this game that is really funny in retrospect. So there had been a website under construction over at Square that was going to serve as a usable website for the upcoming Final Fantasy X. But they kind of wanted to test it out. So they reworked it so that it would serve as a complementary resource for the strategy guides you could buy for FF9. Basically, the way it would work is you would buy the physical guide, and it would provide you with keywords that could then be taken to the website, and when entered, this would provide extra information. And people were mad because to them, this was, why did I buy this book if half the information's not even in it?
Yep.
The backlash was apparently so strong that Square scrapped the idea of using anything similar for Final Fantasy X. They were not going to try again. They weren't going to touch that.
And now today, Square just has bad ideas about cryptocurrency. So there you go.
Yeah. So we've come full circle. FF9 reviewed incredibly well upon release, has a 94 on Metacritic for the PS1 version. Future releases didn't fare quite as well, but they're still pretty well liked. The lowest aggregate score on Metacritic is a 76 for the Switch version, but it's got like mid to low 80s for everything else, essentially. Like I said, it's kind of one of the games that a lot of people claim is like, it's the best one. But I learned that a lot of the criticisms were split in terms of how certain things were in the game. For instance, one of the things that critics were sort of divided on was whether or not Kuja was effective as a main antagonist, because, you know, you compare him to Sephiroth or Kefka. Do you even know what Kuja looks like?
I don't.
Exactly. So he is a very forgettable antagonist. I'm with the critics on that side for that one. A lot of them also didn't really like the game's pace during battles. Battle is really slow paced in this game, though I don't think it's that bad, honestly. And there were also a lot of critics who did not like how the trance system worked, and I think that was overall a majority. And like I said earlier, I kind of agree with that. It sold really well in Japan, though, selling 2.65 million copies and cementing itself as the second highest seller in the region in 2000. In the US, though, the game didn't really do as well. It didn't even come close to selling the amount that would have brought them up to the level of FF7 or FF8. But as of March 2016, according to Square, the PlayStation version of Final Fantasy IX has sold over 5.5 million copies. I assume they're counting the PS1 classics on PS3 for that. It is regularly up there with 6 and 7, like I said, for the debate of which Final Fantasy is the best one. Characters have appeared in Dissidia and other Final Fantasy spin-offs. In fact, Steiner is in that very unfortunate kart racer that just came out.
Yeah.
And I believe Zidane and Garnet specifically have been in Dissidia. I don't know if anybody else has. Vivi is in Kingdom Hearts 2 for some reason.
Yeah, that's where I first learned of Vivi.
Same. I had no idea where he was from. He might as well not be in that game. And apparently an animated TV show is in development. I think I remember them announcing this. It was announced last year in 2021. And it's going to be a younger aimed demographic show. I don't know. But more interestingly, current leaks and rumors seem to point to a full remake being in the works. So, time will tell where that goes.
I would be interested in that for sure. Yeah, it's right up there with the NVIDIA leak with the Final Fantasy Tactics remake that we talked about a couple episodes ago. So yeah, we'll have to see.
Yeah. So let's talk about an artist involved in the soundtrack. Obviously, the whole soundtrack was composed by Nobuo Uematsu. This would be his last one as being the sole composer for a Final Fantasy game. After this, you'd get people like Masashi Hamauzu on 10 and stuff like that. And now Uematsu has basically stepped away from Final Fantasy almost entirely at this point. But Emiko Shiratori is who we're going to focus on today. She was born on March 16th, 1950, somewhere in Japan. She entered the music industry in 1969 when she and Sumio Akutagawa formed a folk group called Toi et Moi, which had a very successful run until being disbanded in 1973, and that's when she sort of took off and began her own solo career. She was a performer at both the 1972 Sapporo Winter Olympics and the 1998 Nagano Winter Olympics. Music is a heavy part of her family. It seems to just run in the whole thing. Her husband, Sumio Shiratori, is a composer and producer, while her daughter, Maika Shiratori, is a singer. And it's very odd that she married somebody with the same first name as her last partner. I'm only just now realizing that. You can actually find her website at emikoshiratori.woodgreen.jp. It's a very, very dated website. It feels like it was made 10 years ago, if not longer, but she's still updating it. She has a blog on that website. The last post was from February of 2022. She's still active. In terms of discography, she has a bunch of solo albums. Obviously, FF9 appears to be the only game that she has performed for, but apparently, when Nintendo put out an official Ocarina of Time rearranged album for The Legend of Zelda, she can be heard in a vocal arrangement of Epona's song. She also wrote and performed a lyrical version of Aerith's theme that was included as a bonus track on the release of Suteki Dane as a single. That's the vocal song from Final Fantasy X. In terms of historical development research, Nobuo Uematsu says this is his favorite soundtrack in the series. And he said multiple times. He believes this is his best work. I kind of agree, but it's really hard to pick, because all of them have such good soundtracks. And especially now when you have Masayoshi Soken on these things, and he's killing it all the time. Apparently the approach was, quote, in early discussions about the game, Ito asked him to compose themes for the 8 main characters, along with, quote, an exciting battle track, a gloomy danger-evoking piece, and around 10 other tracks. Somehow, this eventually ballooned into Uematsu composing around 160 songs for Final Fantasy IX, with 140 of them being present in the game. Apparently, during writing sessions, Square gave him the ability to take a travel break, and he would go to Europe to try and get inspiration for working on Final Fantasy IX. He spent a lot of time looking at ancient architecture in Germany and stuff like that. And he sort of cited this as being a huge inspiration, as well as being influenced by medieval style music. But he also wanted to give like a very warm feeling to the game's soundtrack, and for this reason, he incorporated instruments that weren't commonly heard in fantasy, such as the kazoo or the dulcimer. I don't know where the kazoo plays in. I don't remember hearing a kazoo, but I'll take his word for it. He knows better than I do. But anyways, it's his favorite soundtrack in the series. Let's hear what it sounds like overall. Let's start with critical track number 1. It's Battle 1. This is, without a doubt, one of my favorite battle themes in Final Fantasy, just in general. But I really, really like how it's got the classic bass line. It's so good, and I'm pretty sure this is the first game it shows up in since FF6. But it's just really, really good. It feels very fitting for an epic battle, and it sort of helps when the unfortunate part about random encounters in Final Fantasy IX is they all take so long to load.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, the baseline part of the song is over by the time the fight starts. So it's a good thing this is a good song, because my patience is already tried after that point. But I really, really like this piece. It's great.
Yeah, I feel like this is going back to the basics of what you would expect a Final Fantasy battle track to sound like. And yeah, it's fantastic. Like the trumpet melodies that get in there, really cool stuff. Though I had that kind of buried, forgotten memory of how long the loading takes. I think it's a little better on the PS1 classic. On PS3, that's where I had watched the game being played before. But oh my gosh, for a old loading CD-ROM on the original PlayStation, yeah, I can only imagine. Though at the same time, I can only imagine that would compound with maybe hearing the song too much and maybe it getting grating.
Little bit. The Switch, for what it's worth, which is where I played it, still has the problem of super long load times.
Why? That's so weird.
Yeah, it's absolutely bizarre.
Fix it in the remake. Let's go.
Yeah, that's all we need. Just fix that in the remake. All set. Following that is critical track number 2, though, which is actually my second favorite song in the game. It's Over the Hill. This song's also been referred to historically as like Over That Hill or
Crossing That Hill or something like that, yeah.
According to Spotify, the official release says it's called Over the Hill, so that's what we're going to go with. This is one of the best world map songs ever written. It's got the leitmotif of the main theme of the game, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But it's just this really peaceful, adventurous, sprawling theme to it. It's really, really low key, especially when you think of like other games similar to it. Like the closest I can think in Final Fantasy before this would have been Terra's theme, but that also has like a dramatic flair to it.
It's really interesting you say that, because I was thinking of Terra's theme as well, but I'm like, yeah, that's more March-like. And yeah, this is a different vibe altogether.
And it feels more relaxed, which is really weird at certain parts of the game, but it's just got this sort of feeling that washes over you as you listen to it, and I absolutely adore this song.
This had to be here for sure. It's a spectacular overworld theme, and in the clip definitely shows a little bit of how the piece starts, with it just having this very relaxing vibe, but I especially like when it brings in those additional instruments to kind of bring the leitmotif back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how often people would be able to hear that part of the piece. Now that I think about it, you got to be on the overworld screen for quite a long time. Maybe you just haven't encountered a random fight, or maybe you're just hanging out and chilling and listening to the music. But it's a piece that is really prominent in this game, and I think it's a necessary inclusion here in the Critical 5.
So it continues where it left off after a battle. But fun fact, when the Switch version first came out, there was a bug that caused it to start over after every fight.
Yeah, see, that's what I figured. That's what I figured. Yeah, interesting.
That has been fixed. I will say that has been fixed, but that was a problem when that first came out on Switch.
Well, good that people get to listen to the whole piece. There you go.
Following that, critical check number 3, he might be completely unmemorable, but we should at least talk about his theme. It's Kuja's theme. Is it Kefka's theme? No. Is it those chosen by the planet? No. But I still like it. This heavy piano sort of gives him a bit of a dramatic flair. I don't remember what his motivation was, which is a really great sign for your antagonist. But this song, at the very least, does feel very threatening and like the bounds of madness or something like that.
And it's that the da 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 da, like dividing up the triplets there that kind of show that descent to madness. I think it's a really good way of putting it. Oh gosh, this song just takes me back to, you mentioned ProZD earlier, his videos where he's talking about like Lysanderoth, and it's like, my machinations will be complete. And I think he uses this piece. That's what it makes me think of. I mean, it's a great villain track, and it is not surprising with the affinity for Final Fantasy IX with him there. But yeah, no, you love piano, and it's always great when piano is used in an evil way, just solely piano here too. Nice that like no other instruments are coming in. It's just the kind of controlled chaos there.
Yeah. I remembered nothing else about Kuja except that his song is good. That's literally it. Oh, it's so unfortunate. Anyways, let's talk about my favorite song in the game. Critical track number 4, this is Not Alone. This is not only my favorite song in the game, it's my favorite moment in the game. It is a very, very late game moment that I had not heard people talk about. But it was one of those moments where like you're playing it and you get to that part and you're just like, oh, I see why people really like this game now. It's just a fantastic fantastic sequence. And this song is a big part of it. It is a sequence of Zidane having decided that he has to do everything on his own. And he's like injured and walking through this area, and all the other party members are encountering him along the way and basically shouting like, "No, idiot, we're here with you too. We can do it too. We're behind you." And it's just this really, really, really powerful sequence. And this song adds so much to it. It's fantastic.
So what you're telling me is in Persona 5, when you're gathering all your friends again, it has Final Fantasy IX to thank for that. Got it.
Kinda, but I think Final Fantasy IX does it way better.
Oh, I'm sure. In the clip here, it's definitely later into the piece, and it's the slow build up to that. And that's really good to hear. That's like a powerful story moment. But listening to this, I'm fixated on those electric guitar midis. Because, boy, that is definitely a time of we're trying the best we can with the technology and the instruments available here in the late 90s, early 2000s.
PS1, baby. You get the same with Fight On and Final Fantasy VII.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a really, really good song and a really, really good sequence. But the main event of this Critical 5, let's be real, is Critical Track number 5, Melodies of Life.
A voice from the past, joining yours and mine, adding up the layers of harmony. And so it goes on and on. Melodies of life to the sky beyond the flying bird.
This song was performed by Emiko at Shiratori. There she is. Arranged by Shiro Hamaguchi. The clip we played is from the English version, but Shiratori actually performed both English and Japanese versions of this song. Which is very interesting, because usually when we hear about songs that have both languages, it's a different vocalist on both sides. Apparently, the English version of this song was so popular in Japan that it got released as its own single later on. This is the main theme of Final Fantasy IX. You can hear the leitmotif from Over the Hill in this song. Emiko Shiratori absolutely kills it. Her vocals are fantastic. And on the official soundtrack, something that I really, really like, that I think really fits in with the idea that this was supposed to be an homage to the series' past. After the song Melodies of Life ends, it goes into a orchestrated version of the original Final Fantasy I theme. And it's really, really neat and really good. But overall, like, this song is just, it's very pretty. Do I think it's better than Suteki Dane? Yes, actually. I really like this song in pretty much every form that it takes, and it's performed at Final Fantasy concerts all the time, sometimes by Emiko Shiratori. So, yeah, I love this song.
I thought I had never heard this piece before. And then the first verse, so it's outside the clip here. The first verse plays and it's like, oh, nope, I have. Okay. Mm-hmm. I didn't think the chorus was especially memorable, but I mean, it just sounds gorgeous. And that's why it's here in the clip. Also because I feel like I had heard people referencing online, just like in quotes, and so it goes on and on. And so I hear that, I'm like, oh, that's what you're talking about. Like, oh man. So like, it's just kind of a conflation of things here for me where it's like, oh yeah, that's where I've heard this before.
Yeah. Melodies of Life, to the sky beyond the flying birds.
Great translations.
All right. You mentioned that you have some Cutting Room 4 tracks. Hit me.
Yeah, I feel like when I flip through the soundtrack, I'm like, these are famous pieces that I feel like should at least be brought up because even I know them. What's that about? The first one of these is A Place to Call Home. Or how it gets translated out in fan versions before an official soundtrack comes and says, no, this is what it's called. I've heard this often referred to as the place I'll return to someday, but A Place to Call Home is nicer and cleaner and more official.
And also fits a lot better with the game's overall theming.
Yeah, that too. So this is the title screen music. And so I feel like this is often, and maybe you're hearing this and you're like, oh, I've heard this before. I feel like when people are like, what's the music from Final Fantasy IX? Whether it's in music trivia things, Sporkle, what have you, it's often this theme. Like this is the Final Fantasy IX song. And is it the best representation for the music throughout the soundtrack? No. But it's this kind of whistle, woodwind kind of playing here that's the simple melody, and it's gorgeous. There's not much going on here, but wow, it sets off an identity immediately.
Yeah, it's a very nice, peaceful track that fits very well on the title screen of this game.
The other one I decided to include here is Vivi's theme. As we've referenced already, Vivi, a complicated character in this game, and a really interesting character theme to go with it. Just all these plucked strings here, a clarinet comes in, and then the flute. I feel like this, considering the MIDIs at the time, I'm really impressed by this one, how easily translatable it seems into, like, if you could imagine a full modern orchestration of this. Like, this would translate over so well because the instruments chosen are so good here considering the limitations of the time. It's just an interesting, quirky, plucky theme.
Yeah, it's got this real sense of innocence to it, which is good because I believe Vivi is like 10.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a very innocent child running around doing this international war stuff. Yeah, this song fits him very, very well. As it should. He's the best character in the game. Mine are a bit more off the beaten path, but I can't talk about this game and not talk about Ukulele de Chocobo. This is my favorite version of the Chocobo theme. I love this song. It's so good. Fiddle de Chocobo in 7 is a very close second, but this one just feels happy. And I always find myself sort of tapping my foot along to it when I listen to it. It's the best version of the song, in my opinion.
The trivia factoid about this game being developed in Hawaii has just been given a whole new texture and flavor with this. That's incredible.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Oh, that's neat. I like that. And my other track is way off the beaten path. It's Roses of May. It is this gorgeous piano piece that's just very sad. I want to say that it plays during some of the parts of the game where, like, you're at your lowest, you are losing things aren't going well for our intrepid heroes. But overall, like, this song is it's just a really neat piece, and I wish I could learn it on piano. If I ever end up taking piano lessons, I think this is going to be on the short list of songs I'd like to learn to play.
Yeah, just gorgeous. Not surprised that it resonates with you, as we both love piano so much, but you especially. So this one's another one where, again, the official soundtrack, both the disc and the Spotify release, yes, Roses of May or Rose of May. The version I had from years back, similarly to how A Place to Call Home was titled The Place I'll Return to Someday, I'm trying to find this one, and turns out I had it, the rip I had, whatever, had it titled Loss of Me. And I'm like, how the Rose of May, me? Like, oh, no. So someone just read some Japanese very, very badly, maybe? So, I don't know. That's all I have to say about this one.
Yeah, it's, that's not the best way to get your title. But what will I never forget about Final Fantasy IX? I think that it has the strongest theming of any of the Final Fantasies I've played. It plays with a lot of themes of, like, what defines the concept of home for you? How do you figure out, like, where you belong, sort of, I guess. It's very sort of existential. I mean, you have Vivi, this 10-year-old who has a whole subplot of, oh, I'm going to die someday, and I don't know when that will be. Zidane's stuff is interestingly put into the themes, even though he's, as a character, he just sort of sucks. He sucks so much. Steiner has as an upswing as he learns his whole arc is like, I love my home, but I need to admit to myself that my home is doing terrible, terrible things, which is something some people could really use a lesson in nowadays. But yeah, it's a nice game to play. I think it's my least favorite of the Final Fantasies I have so far played. But overall, I do not regret having played it in general.
Yeah, from what I've seen and what I know about the game, I'm definitely interested in a remake. It doesn't have to be like a full-blown one, just some texture cleanup, some speed up and cleanup, baby. I think that's really all it needs. But then people might call it a remaster, and there might be a whole thing there. But yeah, it could do with some fresh paint.
Yeah, and hopefully it is, like, the Switch version is pretty cleaned up, and it does have, like, the speed up option and
right.
the turn off random encounter option and the option to just immediately put everybody's level at 99. Like, there's an option in the menu to just do that.
Yeah.
I am interested to see what a remake is gonna be. Is it gonna be FF7 or... kind of hope not. I don't think this game would work very well as an action game. But if it's just like, hell, if it's Bravely, make it in the style of Bravely Default.
Sure.
That sounds like it'd work really well. So who knows? I'm very interested in seeing how that turns out.
And that's even if it happens, right? So we'll have to keep our eyes peeled there. Well, two games that we've been definitely itching to talk about on the show. Granted, they have weird protagonist names, but they also take that turn for what the franchise usually is. And just more their tone and more their theming with Portal and with Final Fantasy IX. And that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. That's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify. We have a podcast feed where you can go subscribe and get your episodes there on Spotify, but we also have a Spotify playlist where if we talk about a video game music track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Both of these games are actually on Spotify. Portal specifically as an attachment to Portal 2's soundtrack. It's sort of stapled to the bottom of it. FF9 just on its own. So yeah, both of those are heading there.
Well, I'm glad it got included one way or the other. That's good, for sure. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Also, give us some suggestions for games or artists that you'd like us to cover in the future. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Next week, and I cannot believe we are only just now getting to him, I'm going to be talking about Hirokazu Ando.
Same thing from my composer. Can't believe it's taken us so long to talk about Jessica Curry. Should be a good couple games there. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
Well, obviously, if I'm going to find a cover of something from Final Fantasy IX, it's got to be Melodies of Life. That's the one. And I actually found a new channel that I had never heard of, but they got a subscription out of me immediately. It is the YouTube channel Pittan, that's Pittan, and they do a small ensemble cover of Melodies of Life. And it's absolutely gorgeous, and I've been looking into their history a lot more since discovering it, so I hope anybody listening does the same, and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.